So I've been waiting for OLED technology to become a little bit more affordable and mainstream before making the switch from my traditional LED monitor. So one solid Google session later, it seems like LG's latest gaming monitor for 2024, the 45GS96QB, seemed to tick off a lot of the boxes both myself and others have been wanting in a single monitor for years. Ultra-wide, curved, OLED, high refresh rate, etc. I just really wanted to experience the immersiveness that an OLED panel literally almost completely wrapping around my head provides, and above all else, see if it really is worth the upgrade over those trusty old LED gaming monitors most of us have been using for the last 10 years. So here are my thoughts and experiences after using one of these things every single day for the last couple of weeks. So let's get some specs out of the way first. Design-wise, it does look pretty slick. I mean, it's got thin bezels, minimal frontal branding, and the back has a simple logo with some LED lights that you can change in the settings menu. There is an adjustable stand with respectable swivel, tilt, and height adjustment, but I prefer a monitor arm if possible. Now, the port selection is pretty standard. 2 HDMI ports and a single display port. All support variable refresh rate. There's also 2 USB downstream ports and a headphone out that combos as a mic input. There's also a USB-C port that supports 65 watts of power delivery for laptop users, which is something I don't usually see very often in gaming-oriented monitors. Now, the panel itself is a 45-inch WQHD OLED with HDR10 and good color accuracy, getting about 98.5% of the DCI-P3 color gamut, which is impressive for a gaming monitor, but kind of expected for something in this price range. Also, if you're interested, it has a bunch of new tech not present in previous models, like VESA certified HDR True Black 400 and MLA Plus to improve OLED brightness, which means maximum HDR brightness is now an eye-watering 1300 nits, but more on that later. Now, because of OLED technology allowing each individual pixel to handle its own light and color almost instantaneously, LG can push the refresh rate to 240 Hz with a 0.03 millisecond gray to gray response time. This was completely unheard of with the now, some would say, outdated LED monitors, and was why TN monitors were so popular for a while, despite the washed out colors and general poor brightness. And yes, this monitor does have an anti-glare coating, but it's been done very well. You do lose a little of the image quality compared to a glossy finish, but the trade-off is reflections are significantly less annoying or impactful, especially because this monitor's curve is quite aggressive, so I found it more likely to pick up random reflections in the room. So now is time to begin the deep dive into not just this monitor in particular, but the whole OLED/ultra-wide hype, because this is my first ever OLED experience, and yeah, the hype is real. The best way I can describe it is the experience I had when I upgraded my 60 Hz monitor to a 144 Hz monitor. Once you try it, you never want to go back. In fact, sometimes it's painful going back to the old one. I loaded up Helldivers 2 and was just blown away by how vivid the environment looked. Anytime there's fire, explosions, or bullet traces flying across the screen, it's almost as if they pop out at you. The 500 kilogram Eagle Bomb stratagem, for example, it almost lights up your entire room and is one of the most immersive gaming experiences I've ever had. The nighttime maps definitely take this to the next level. You can't really see it on the camera that well, but in real life, it's very bright. And that is the 1300 nits of peak HDR brightness talking. And despite the relatively average 275 nits of typical brightness, I found it overall pretty immersive for gaming. Now, that being said, lots of other games obviously look great as well. For example, Escape from Tarkov. The factory map, especially at night, looks almost like a horror movie. On all my previous monitors using LED tech, the dark parts would look grey due to the backlight, but on OLED, of course, those pixels can turn off completely, so if it's supposed to be pitch black in game, it's pitch black in real life. This is kind of a catch-22 sometimes, because although it looks incredible, it does mean people can camp in dark corners easier. So in some games, you'll have to adjust the settings to bump up the dark levels a bit, which may ruin those inky blacks. But at least you get the choice, unlike on LED monitors with their backlight bleed. Now, how much you'll benefit from the huge visual quality increases that OLED brings depends on the game. Some of the shooters like CSGO or Call of Duty Warzone, for example, always look kind of washed out, so you probably won't notice a massive difference. So this brings me to the overall gaming experience on an OLED ultrawide. Now, as someone who came from a pretty standard 27-inch 16:9 aspect ratio monitor, going to a 45-inch 21:9 aspect ratio really did take some getting used to. I was worried that there was just so much more to visually absorb that it could be distracting while gaming. But I realized that the far edges kind of blur out and you don't really notice them. I mean, the human eye can only focus on so much in front of it, which means you can't just see everything in focus on a huge ultrawide, obviously. Does it give you an actual tactical advantage in games? Yes, in some situations. In Escape from Tarkov, for example, it meant I could just stand still or hide somewhere and not have to move or rotate my head as much to check for enemy players. Which is kind of important because in some games, if you make unnecessary noise or movements, you die. In games where you can rotate your head separately of your body, you can side check while running across roads or through dangerous areas and get a massive field of view instead of a more narrow one with a standard 16:9 monitor. Also, if you adjust the FOV slider on games to increase your field of view, something super common on 16:9 aspect ratio monitors, it has the unintended consequence of making objects appear smaller. Objects like enemy players, which means seeing and aiming at them is technically more difficult on higher FOV settings. On an ultrawide, I found that I didn't need to increase my FOV slider as much as I used to. And this had the unintended benefit of me still having a really wide field of view due to the ultrawide aspect ratio, but without decreasing the size of objects. Will it turn you into an esports beast and instantly double your kill-death ratio? No, the benefits are relatively marginal. For example, sometimes I would just straight up miss enemy players on screen. Take this clip as an example. I'm so focused on what's ahead of me that even though an enemy player is clearly visible on the far right of the screen, I just don't notice him until after he starts shooting at me. Again, not a fault of the ultrawide, there's only so much you can concentrate on at once, and if it was a 16:9 panel, he never would have appeared on screen in the first place. Mostly I found the ultrawide aspect ratio just adds to overall immersiveness. Those of you that play racing games or Sims, for example, you'll definitely notice it more than those of us that primarily play shooter games. Note that it seems most games support the 21:9 aspect ratio these days, more so than the 32:9 ratio that some other ultrawide gaming monitors use. One of the main reasons for this immersiveness is the way the monitor is actually curved around your head. You see, the human eye is of course round, and it's designed not just to stare at a flat image right in front of it, but observe the overall environment around it. In scientific terms, the human eye has an R value of around 1000 R. The R stands for radius and it refers to the amount of curve in millimeters. The lower the R value, the more aggressive the curve. 45 GS96QB's R value of 800 R is a very aggressive curve for a monitor. But look at what happens when I hold something right in front of my eyes and trace the other end in front of the monitor. It's roughly the same distance from my eyes to the monitor, no matter where it's pointing. This is important because on flat screens, the larger they get, for example, ultra-wide monitors but with zero or minimal curve, the outer edges tend to become a little blurred and distorted because they don't match the R value of our eyes. Now, when you're not gaming, how is this monitor for just general everyday productivity stuff, like the things we do on the computer when we're not gaming? 45 inches is a huge amount of screen real estate, and you can fill it up with a lot of stuff at once, so it's great for productivity. Now, one negative I do want to mention, and this is a trade-off you'll have to make when purchasing this monitor, is that I really do not enjoy the 1440p or WQHD vertical resolution on a monitor of this size for productivity tasks. The pixel density just isn't there. You can really notice it with text or UI elements like the taskbar or even during video or photo editing. I much prefer the 4K resolution for non-gaming tasks. But trade-offs, right? If you want that 4K resolution, first of all, the monitor is going to be more expensive. And second of all, you need a really beefy GPU to push all of those extra pixels to the screen. And for a gaming-oriented monitor, 1440p is pretty good. Now, let's talk competition for a second. The obvious comparison is the 49-inch Odyssey OLED G9 gaming monitor from Samsung. It has a lot of the same features, ultra-wide OLED panel, 240Hz refresh rate, 0.03 millisecond response time, etc., but with two main differences: size and curve amount. Let's start with size. It's 49 inches versus LG's 45 inches. Now, 4 inches doesn't really sound like much. Where have I heard that before? But let's just dive into the size difference and see what effect it has. Obviously, you'll require a bit more desk space for the 49-inch monitor, as it's longer, but if you actually look at the screen size differences, the vertical height of the 49-inch 32:9 aspect ratio screen is relatively low. So it kind of feels a little bit smaller vertically when compared to the LG monitor. In fact, if you calculate the actual screen area, the LG is technically bigger despite being 45 inches versus 49 inches due to that increased vertical height. So in terms of size, it really just comes down to if you prefer a slightly taller image or a slightly wider image. The second difference is, of course, the amount of curve. The Samsung is 1800R versus the much more aggressive curve of 800R on the LG. Does this actually make a big difference in reality? Not really. I think the screens are just, when they're sitting in front of you, they're just so big already that the little bit of additional curve on the LG doesn't really make that much difference. So overall, how do I rate the experience of such a premium gaming monitor? And this is coming from someone who was on the fence up until very recently. Honestly, OLED has been a massive upgrade for me. If you've got an aging LED monitor, definitely consider the upgrade, especially because now OLED technology seems to be getting more and more affordable. It's not going to completely bankrupt you like it would have a year or two ago. In terms of going ultra-wide versus non-ultra-wide, that's a harder decision. Sure, the ultra-wide is more immersive, you might get a slight competitive advantage in some games, as I've discussed, but the footprint on your desk is huge. And that's something to really consider if you don't really have a lot of room to put it. If you're not a big fan of the 45-inch ultra-wide, you can go for a smaller model like the 27-inch UltraGear with very similar specs. Now, regardless of which OLED gaming monitor you end up going for, just like going from a 60Hz monitor to a high refresh rate monitor, once you try it, you are never going to want to go back.